Robert De Niro is one of the greatest actors of all time, known for his intense performances, method acting, and an incredible career that has spanned over 5 decades. From The Godfather Part II to Raging Bull, Goodfellas, and Taxi Driver, De Niro has cemented his place in Hollywood history as one of its most respected and celebrated stars. But behind the fame and accolades, his life has been filled with personal struggles, health concerns, and heartbreaking losses. Today we take a deep dive into the life and tragic ending of Robert De Niro, his rise to stardom, his legendary career, and the challenges he has faced in his later years. He grew up in a household swirling with art and creativity thanks to his father, Robert De Niro Sr., and mother, Virginia Admiral. Both were painters, nurtured under the guidance of a famous modern artist named Hans Hofmann. Unfortunately, life was never easy for De Niro Sr. His style leaned more toward classical forms, which set him at odds with the emerging wave of modern art. Feeling alienated and overshadowed, he wrestled with bitterness, and the tension in his professional life soon bled into his family life. By the time young Robert was 2, his parents had split, leaving his upbringing an emotional patchwork of influences, from the open-mindedness of his mother to the devout Catholicism of his paternal grandparents. Though his father was born Catholic and his mother was from a Presbyterian background, they were both lapsed in their faith, one an atheist, the other simply unobservant. This left the grandparents to operate in secret, quietly baptizing their grandson against the wishes of his parents. Perhaps that was an early clue that De Niro's path would be one of complex dualities: tradition versus modernism, familial ties versus personal freedom, and the thick swirl of the spiritual, the artistic, and the rebellious. Raised in the Little Italy neighborhood of Manhattan, De Niro might have looked the part of a future gangster actor, but ironically, his pale complexion stuck out among the darker-skinned locals. That discrepancy earned him the nickname Bobby Milk, a teasing label from his childhood friends. And these friends, according to his father, weren't exactly the best influences, streetwise kids who knew too much too soon. But sometimes that unsavory crowd gave the shy young De Niro a sense of belonging that he lacked at home. Friendships formed in those narrow streets turned into lifelong bonds, and the grit he soaked up on the sidewalks would later inform some of his most unforgettable film roles. Underneath his streetwise associations was a boy so shy he was practically invisible when he wasn't clowning around with pals. Relatives noted his withdrawn demeanor, but all of that changed when he encountered acting. At the age of 10, he joined the dramatic workshop, taking on the role of the Cowardly Lion in a stage production of The Wizard of Oz. If that's hard to picture, De Niro as the timid lion. Remember, he was still that introverted kid. Yet something about the stage sparked his transformation. Pretending to be another person gave him a freedom he never felt in real life. The audience's applause and acceptance were the perfect antidotes to his self-consciousness. By his teenage years, he was convinced that acting was his calling. School felt restrictive, irrelevant. At 16, he took the plunge and dropped out, sacrificing the normalcy of high school life to chase a dream that was only just beginning to form. Imagine an 18-year-old De Niro flipping channels on the television, stumbling upon a show whose acting strikes him as less than stellar. As he would later recall, he thought to himself, "If they can do it, I can do it." That realization lit a fire beneath him. Soon he was enrolling in renowned acting schools, including the fabled Lee Strasberg's Actors Studio and Stella Adler's Conservatory. These institutions preached the method, a technique that demanded total immersion in a character's psychology, background, and emotional fabric. The method suited De Niro's intensity perfectly. It let him dive headlong into roles, shutting out everything else. This dedication became his trademark, but in those early days, it was still just a young artist's hunger to prove himself. While we might think of De Niro as the go-to guy for gritty crime dramas and psychologically tormented leads, his initial break came in comedy, specifically in Brian De Palma's 1968 film, Greetings. If you're not familiar with that movie, you're not alone. It was a modest success, more important for putting De Niro on the industry's radar than for becoming a masterpiece. He followed it up with another De Palma comedy, The Wedding Party. Critics saw his comedic instincts and timing, but something deeper simmered beneath that light-hearted surface. Before long, he'd be carrying a dramatically heavier workload. In an industry where seizing the right role can mean everything, De Niro made a surprising move in the early 70s. He landed a small part in Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, 1972, which was shaping up to be quite the epic. But mid-production, an opportunity for a different project came along, one he found more compelling. He asked to be let out of his Godfather contract. In hindsight, turning his back on a film that would become a cinematic legend might seem crazy, but De Niro wasn't chasing easy wins. He wanted roles that spoke to him, that he could sink his teeth into, and ironically, that bold choice didn't burn any bridges. Coppola kept him in mind for the future, a choice that would forever change De Niro's career. After some smaller projects, De Niro tackled 1973's Bang the Drum slowly, playing a slow-witted but big-hearted baseball player diagnosed with a terminal illness. The role required him to learn baseball, though, as the novelist behind the story joked, he picked up only as much as needed to look authentic. The film turned heads and helped De Niro fine-tune his ability to morph physically and mentally for a role. That same year, his path would collide with an ambitious young director from Little Italy, Martin Scorsese. Mean Streets, 1973, featured De Niro alongside Harvey Keitel in a raw, fervent portrayal of life in New York's underbelly. The film was gritty, urgent, personal, and showcased Scorsese's flair for capturing the violent poetry of street life. For De Niro, this was more than a mere gig. It was the start of a decades-long collaboration that would yield some of cinema's most iconic films. According to crew members, De Niro's performance in Mean Streets was a clinic in method acting. Even when cameras weren't rolling, he would sometimes isolate himself, remaining in character's headspace. That approach was about to become even more evident in his next major role. Remember how De Niro left The Godfather? Coppola didn't forget about him. So for The Godfather Part II, 1974, the director cast De Niro as the young Vito Corleone, a role that demanded he capture the gravitas that Marlon Brando had brought to the older Corleone in the original film. The gamble paid off spectacularly. De Niro's performance brimmed with quiet menace and depth. He was filming overseas when the Academy Awards recognized him with the Best Supporting Actor Oscar, so Coppola accepted on his behalf. De Niro joined his idol Brando in a rare club, two actors winning an Oscar for portraying the same character. This was all at the age of 31, already an Oscar winner for arguably the greatest gangster epic of all time. But De Niro wasn't about to rest on his laurels. The next big leap came with 1976's Taxi Driver, directed by Scorsese and written by Paul Schrader. Playing Travis Bickle, a mentally unstable Vietnam veteran turned taxi driver, De Niro threw himself into the role. He studied the psychology of war vets, lost weight, and got a real taxi license so he could roam the streets of Manhattan, observing late-night customers and soaking up the city's seedier sides. The film gave us one of the most iconic improvised lines in cinema history. "You talking to me?" Legend has it De Niro conjured it on the spot, revealing how fully he'd become Travis Bickle in that claustrophobic mirror scene. Taxi Driver was a critical hit and earned him a Best Actor nomination. Though he lost out to Peter Finch for Network, he was no longer just that guy who was in The Godfather Part II. He was Robert De Niro, a leading man who could creep under your skin. On the set of Taxi Driver, De Niro also found romance with cast member Diane Abbott, who had a small role as a ticket clerk. The two married in 1976. That same year, De Niro adopted Abbott's daughter, Drina, and welcomed a son, Raphael Eugene. Their family life looked picture-perfect for over a decade, but beneath that facade, De Niro's personal world was infinitely more complicated. Rumors would later emerge about a secret affair with singer Helena Springs, who claimed he'd fathered her child. It led to a long, painful legal dispute that ended with DNA tests revealing he wasn't the father. Meanwhile, the De Niro-Abbott bond weakened, and they split in 1988. If balancing personal drama wasn't enough, De Niro also kept selecting roles that demanded extraordinary devotion. The Deer Hunter, 1978, directed by Michael Cimino, saw him again tackling a Vietnam War vet's emotional fallout. Filming was notoriously strenuous, with the cast subjected to intense scenarios, particularly the Russian roulette scenes. De Niro famously asked for a real bullet to be placed in the gun to ramp up the tension, provided the cylinder was carefully spun so it couldn't actually fire. The method might have been extreme, but it certainly contributed to the film's harrowing authenticity. The Deer Hunter would go on to win Best Picture, and De Niro's performance bolstered his reputation as an actor who'd do anything to deliver truth on screen. But none of this compared to what he put his body through for 1980's Raging Bull, his next collaboration with Martin Scorsese. Cast as Jake LaMotta, a boxer whose self-destructive fury spilled over into every part of his life. De Niro didn't just learn to box, he trained so intensely that real boxing trainers claimed he could have turned pro if he dedicated himself to the sport full-time. Even more shocking, he gained around 60 pounds to portray LaMotta in his later years. The transformation was so drastic that it alarmed friends worried about his health. Yet De Niro wore it like a badge of pride, and the gamble paid off. He won the Best Actor Oscar for the role, cementing one of the most legendary performances in film history. Fearing typecasting in roles of brooding criminals or unhinged tough guys, De Niro teamed up with Scorsese again for The King of Comedy, 1982, a darkly comic story about a delusional, fame-hungry wannabe comedian named Rupert Pupkin. It was a departure from the violent gangster narratives, allowing De Niro to show comedic chops in a twisted scenario. Audiences didn't immediately embrace it. Many found the subject matter uncomfortable. Only in retrospect did critics realize how eerily it anticipated our modern culture of celebrity obsession. For De Niro, it was a necessary reminder that he was versatile. He wasn't just the heavy in gangster or war flicks. Meanwhile, Francis Ford Coppola wanted him for The Last Temptation of Christ, but De Niro turned it down, claiming he wasn't right for the role. Sometimes an actor's refusal paves the way for a performance that becomes iconic for someone else. Willem Dafoe stepped in to play Jesus, and De Niro continued seeking roles that felt more organic to his sensibilities. On the home front, after divorcing Diane Abbott, De Niro began an on-off relationship with model Toukie Smith. It was turbulent, peppered with rumors of heated arguments, but they stayed together long enough to welcome twin sons via surrogate in 1995, Julian and Aaron. By then, De Niro had also briefly dated Naomi Campbell, bridging a surprising gap between supermodel runways and Hollywood method acting. But that romance was fleeting. Next came Grace Hightower, a former flight attendant, whom De Niro wed in 1997. The couple had a son, Elliot, in 1998. But if there's one thing De Niro's love life taught us, it's that stability wasn't exactly his hallmark. By 1999, he filed for divorce, triggering a wave of allegations and nasty legal battles, only to reconcile later and renew vows in 2004. That peace lasted over a decade before collapsing again in 2018. Their final divorce proceedings became a drawn-out saga involving finances and child custody. The only predictable thing in De Niro's romantic life seemed to be unpredictability. Legal troubles haven't always centered on his relationships. In 1998, while in France, De Niro got caught in the crosshairs of an international trafficking investigation. Questioned by authorities based on a victim's mention of his name, he vehemently denied any wrongdoing and was eventually cleared. Furious, he swore never to set foot in France again, though he would later soften that stance. It was an early example of how his celebrity could drag him into controversies entirely removed from his own actions. De Niro's long-awaited on-screen collaboration with Al Pacino finally happened in Heat, 1995, directed by Michael Mann. Though they both starred in The Godfather Part II, their characters existed in different timelines, so they never actually shared a scene. In Heat, though, we got a face-to-face diner conversation that instantly became iconic. Two acting powerhouses quietly trying to read each other's souls. They teamed up again in The Irishman, 2019, among other projects, but that diner scene remains a pinnacle of actor versus actor cinematic tension. In the mid-1990s, De Niro also branched into producing in unexpected ways. He was behind Tribeca Interactive, which financed a point-and-click video game called 9: The Last Resort. Despite a star-studded voice cast, Cher, Jim Belushi, Ellen DeGeneres, the game wasn't a hit. De Niro discovered that interactive media was a whole different ballgame, and he shifted his focus back to film production. But that entrepreneurial spark would come in handy later. Those who argue De Niro lost some intensity in his later career might point to comedic roles like Analyze This, 1999, or Meet the Parents, 2000, as evidence he was mellowing. But consider how those movies show a performer willing to poke fun at his own image. The comedic gangster in Analyze. This directly parodies the tough guys he'd played for decades. Teaming up with Billy Crystal, he learned to blend his dramatic gravitas with comedic timing, an approach that was box office gold. It also introduced him to an entire generation that knew him less from Raging Bull or Taxi Driver and more from That Gangster Who Needs Therapy or The Father-in-Law from Hell. Despite comedic detours, De Niro never abandoned serious cinema. In 1990, Goodfellas reteamed him with Scorsese and showcased him as Jimmy Conway, a genial but lethal gangster. Off-screen, De Niro's real-life research for such roles brought him uncomfortably close to individuals with genuine mafia ties. After the film's success, he tried to distance himself from any unsavory acquaintances. But method acting can sometimes blur lines between fact and fiction, and De Niro's brand of authenticity was to get as close to the real thing as possible, sometimes maybe too close. His role in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, 1994, which he also produced, found him as the famed monster. Another transformation, though overshadowed by special effects and critical ambivalence. Nonetheless, it showed he was still willing to push boundaries, physically and emotionally. And when 9/11 devastated Lower Manhattan, De Niro channeled his influence into co-founding the Tribeca Film Festival, 2002. What began as a gesture of economic and cultural revitalization, has become one of the industry's marquee events, proof that De Niro's footprint goes well beyond acting. He's effectively a cultural entrepreneur, shaping not just performance art, but also the broader cinematic landscape. In 2012, David O. Russell's Silver Linings Playbook offered De Niro a paternal, more understated role, earning him another Oscar nomination and revealing a gentler side that resonates strongly with older audiences. He admitted that as he ages, the father figure roles feel more organic, reflective of his real-life experiences. He might not be driving cabs in the dead of night talking to himself in the rearview mirror anymore, but he can bring nuance and wisdom to characters who still have the capacity to explode or break down in tears. It's not all been drama and accolades, though. De Niro caused a stir in 2016 by initially supporting the inclusion of an anti-vaccine documentary at the Tribeca Film Festival. Though he later pulled the film from the schedule, he defended his personal interest in vaccine issues, citing that he has a child with autism and was seeking answers. Many criticized him for giving such theories a platform, but it also revealed that his paternal instincts, his protective nature, extend into the public sphere, even if it sparks controversy. Another lesser-known tidbit involves the extremes he'd go for authenticity. On the set of Cape Fear, 1991, another Scorsese collaboration, he paid a dentist to degrade his teeth for the role, so he'd embody the menacing convict Max Cady more convincingly. When filming wrapped, he shelled out a much bigger sum to restore his smile. That might sound excessive, but it's the kind of commitment De Niro's fans have come to expect. Behind that intensity lurked an equally intense personal history. De Niro discovered later in life that his father was gay, a fact largely unspoken during his childhood. In adulthood, he produced a documentary exploring his father's art and personal journals. Though he admits he still can't bring himself to read them in full, given how candidly they detail the painter's private struggles. It's a reminder that beneath the Hollywood legend, there's a son wrestling with questions about who his father really was and how that shaped his own life. While these revelations about his family might have felt heavy, De Niro's romantic life continued to garner its share of headlines. After reconciling with Grace Hightower, the couple seemed to find stability, renewing vows in 2004 in a star-studded ceremony. But by 2018, they were back on the path to divorce, and it seemed like there was no turning back. Financial battles and custody issues raged, capturing the attention of tabloids. Then, in 2023, at age 79, De Niro announced the birth of another child, this time with girlfriend Tiffany Chen, a martial arts instructor he met on the set of The Intern, 2015. For a man nearing 80, fatherhood wasn't done with him yet. In a strange way, it's entirely in character for De Niro to keep rewriting his personal script. All these family plot twists make one wonder how he's balanced it with a career spanning more than 50 years. The answer might lie in his unstoppable work ethic. Even in his so-called slowed down phase, De Niro starred in The Irishman, 2019, another collaboration with Scorsese that used cutting-edge digital de-aging technology. The film itself felt like a commentary on aging, reflection, and the passing of a criminal era. De Niro immersed himself once again, bridging the gap between the savage young gangster he once portrayed and the reflective older man he's become. Critics praised The Irishman's ambition, and while some viewers balked at the film's epic runtime, De Niro's performance served as a reunion with Pacino and Joe Pesci, three pillars of modern gangster cinema, giving their last great hurrah. Yet what truly cements De Niro's place among the greatest actors is his unwavering commitment to detail. Stories circulate about how, for the deer hunter, he advocated for a single bullet to be loaded in the revolver to maximize tension, or how he spent weeks driving cabs for Taxi Driver, or how he ballooned in weight for Raging Bull, losing it only to morph again for future roles. Even on comedic projects, he worked diligently with co-stars like Billy Crystal to tweak comedic timing until every line landed perfectly. Whether you find him too intense or captivatingly methodical, there's no question he transformed the concept of what an actor could and should do to inhabit a role. He was once considered for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, which eventually became a triumph for Jack Nicholson. Imagine a parallel universe where De Niro had played Randall McMurphy. Would we still have that iconic Nicholson performance? These are the kind of what-if scenarios that sprinkle De Niro's life, like his near participation in The Godfather, or the roles he rejected because he didn't want special effects overshadowing the acting, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, for instance. Each choice, each pivot, shaped a career that's been anything but ordinary. Meanwhile, De Niro's philanthropic side showed itself most powerfully when his friend and co-star, John Cazale, was terminally ill during the filming of The Deer Hunter. When insurance companies balked at hiring Cazale, fearing his illness would jeopardize production, De Niro stepped in personally to cover the costs, ensuring that Cazale could complete his final movie. It was an act of loyalty and generosity that few might associate with De Niro's often distant persona. Yet it underlines a truth. Behind the method acting and formidable presence, he's deeply loyal to those he values. In his later years, De Niro has admitted that he feels more selective about roles. And why not? After half a century of iconic performances, ranging from young Vito Corleone to the unhinged Max Cady, from comedic gangster Paul Vitti in Analyze This to the paternal Pat Solitano Sr. in Silver Linings Playbook, he's earned the right to slow the pace. Still, he hasn't retired. Every so often, a new De Niro project pops up, be it another foray into comedy or a return to the gangster genre. He maintains a presence in the industry he helped redefine, whether through the Tribeca Film Festival or by championing new talents in front of and behind the camera. We can't talk about De Niro without returning to the biggest puzzle at the heart of his artistry. How a shy, pale-skinned kid nicknamed Bobby Milk in Little Italy became the face of cinematic machismo. His father's unfulfilled potential, his mother's atheism and bohemian circles, the secret baptism by his grandparents. These layers all contributed to the man he would become. That swirl of influences manifested as a near fanatical dedication to authenticity and a willingness to vanish into characters. He's as comfortable under 60 pounds of extra weight with his hairline altered to mimic an aging boxer as he is sporting a comedic grin as a gangster struggling with anxiety. Perhaps that ability to vanish was initially a shield for a self-conscious boy, a means to slip into someone else's life to conquer personal insecurities. Or maybe it's a reflection of how he sees art, as total devotion, no half measures allowed. Whichever the case, the result is an actor who, despite personal chaos, divorces, custody battles, tabloid headlines, remains a creative force to be reckoned with. He's had highly publicized confrontations with reporters, fervent political stances. He's never shied away from slamming politicians he dislikes, and controversial decisions at the Tribeca Film Festival. Yet audiences consistently come back to him, searching his eyes for that glint of honesty, that hint of unpredictability that made You Talking to Me not just a line but a pop culture anthem. A final note worth emphasizing: De Niro's relationship with his father's legacy. Robert De Niro Sr. was a talented painter who never quite found the acclaim he deserved in his own lifetime. De Niro has sometimes spoken about feeling compelled to honor that legacy, part of the reason he produced a documentary about his father's artwork and personal struggles. There's a sense that De Niro's relentless push for excellence, his desire to avoid complacency, could stem from living up to the potential his father never got to fulfill. Maybe all those punishing transformations were less about trophies and more about proving that an artist's dedication can carve its own place in history, even if the mainstream initially doesn't understand it. Today, at over 80 years old, De Niro is still in motion. He's still saying yes to intriguing projects, still open to fatherhood, as evidenced by his 7th child's birth in 2023, and still commanding the respect of fellow actors, young and old. He may have slowed down compared to his breakneck schedule in the 1970s and 80s, but his presence lingers in the cultural consciousness. Younger fans discover him through streaming services. Maybe they start with The Irishman and work backward. Or they watch him joking around in Meet the Parents before diving into the more harrowing brilliance of Taxi Driver. In each era, he offers a different shade of his talent, proving that true artistry has no expiration date. What does the future hold for De Niro? He's talked about wanting to do more directing. He directed A Bronx Tale in 1993, a well-received coming-of-age gangster drama. He's remained vocal on social and political issues. The Tribeca Film Festival continues to expand, championing indie filmmakers, foreign cinema, documentaries, and interactive storytelling. In an industry that constantly recycles stars, De Niro has become a permanent fixture, a mentor figure, a living library of cinematic craft. He might not jump at every script that floats by these days, but when he does sign on, he brings half a century of experience to the table. That alone makes his appearances events to watch. And so the tale of Robert Anthony De Niro is a patchwork of extremes. A shy kid turned unstoppable method actor, a relentless performer who can cameo in breezy comedies, a father of multiple children across different relationships, each story weaving in and out of tabloids, an artist driven by the memory of his father's unrecognized genius, a film icon who can pivot from gangster epics to introspective indies and festival entrepreneurship. If there's any single word that captures De Niro, it's intensity. He attacks life and art with the same unwavering glare that Travis Bickle once leveled at an imaginary adversary in a grimy New York mirror. That's the magic of De Niro. You might think you know him from his roles: the stoic gangster, the tortured boxer, the maniac convict, the comedic father-in-law, but then you find out he's funneling money into a film festival, or quietly ensuring a dying friend can finish his last movie, or even spearheading a short-lived video game venture. The man behind those iconic characters is infinitely more layered than any single performance. And as he continues in his 80s to build on that remarkable legacy, whether by surprising us with another baby, delivering another unforgettable role, or fueling new artists through Tribeca, he reaffirms why he's one of Hollywood's reigning titans,